The menus came in heavy leather folders, and my father waited until everyone at the table had one open before he turned to me and smiled the smile he always saved for an audience. "Order something cheap, sweetheart," he said. "You're broke. Get the side salad. It's all you can swing. We'll cover you. Again." There were 12 of us at the long table in the private alcove, and almost all of them laughed. My mother gave the small, apologetic laugh she used when she agreed with him, but wanted credit for being gentle about it. My brother Reed laughed the loud way, the way that asked the room to laugh with him. 2 of my aunts laughed, an uncle laughed. The cousins, who were grown now and had learned the family songs by heart, laughed because that was the chorus and they knew their part. I did not laugh, and I did not flinch. I set the heavy folder down on the white cloth without opening it. I did not need it. I could have recited every line on it from memory, the way you can recite the address of a house you grew up in, because in a manner of speaking I had. "That's all right," I said. "I'm not very hungry." "See," my father said, spreading his hands to the table like a man who had proven something. "She's not very hungry, saves us all a few dollars." I had heard 1,000 versions of that one sentence across 39 years. "You're broke. You'll land on your feet. It's all you can swing." The words changed shape, depending on the occasion, but the shape underneath never did, and the shape underneath was always the same. "We have decided who you are, and nothing you do will be allowed to change it." I had stopped arguing with that shape a long time ago. Arguing with it only fed it. The trick they never learned about me in all those years is that I do my loudest work in silence. A server came toward our table with a tray of waters, a young woman in a charcoal apron. And as she set the glasses down, she looked at me, and then she looked again, the way a person looks when a face has resolved into a name. Her hand paused over my place setting. She started to lean toward me, started to say something, and across the table, Reed lifted 2 fingers and waved her off without looking at her, the way you wave off a fly, and said, "We're all set, thanks." The girl straightened. She glanced at me one more time, then walked back toward the kitchen with the empty tray held against her chest. I watched her go. I folded my hands in my lap. My father was telling the table a story about his last day at the plant, about the cake they had wheeled out and the speech the regional manager had given, and the relatives leaned in and made the warm sounds you make for a man on the night of his retirement. I let the story wash over me. I had given that man 40 years of my life by being born to him, and tonight I had given him one more thing, which was my presence at a table he had chosen, specifically so that he could watch me be small. Because that was the part nobody at the table understood yet. They thought they had picked the most expensive restaurant in the city to make me squirm over a bill I could not pay. They thought the joke was the price. They had no idea that I was the only person in the alcove who knew exactly where we were sitting and exactly whose name was on the deed to the floor under their chairs. The girl in the charcoal apron came back. She did not bring water this time. She came around the long way behind my chair, and she bent down close to my ear, and she said, very quietly, so quietly that only I and perhaps my niece beside me could hear it, "Ms. Dara, your table's ready." The alcove did not go silent all at once. It went silent the way a wave pulls back from a beach, in stages, starting with the people closest to me and moving outward, until even my father, mid-sentence, mid-story, heard the change in the air and stopped and looked down the length of the white cloth at me, and the smile was still on his face, but it had nowhere left to go. I should tell you who I am, because the people at that table never bothered to find out. My hands have a map on them. There is a shine of old burn along the inside of my left forearm from a tilt skillet in a basement kitchen in 2007. There is a notch in my right thumbnail that never grew back right after a mandolin in 2009. My knuckles are wide. When I shake a stranger's hand, they often glance down, because the hand does not match the rest of me, and the hand is the truest thing about me. The hand is 20 years of work that nobody in my family ever once asked to see. I left home at 18 with 2 duffel bags and a bus ticket and $41. And I washed dishes. That is the unglamorous truth of it. I washed dishes in a seafood place where the dish pit flooded every Friday and the manager docked our pay for the mop. Then I learned to peel and portion, and then I learned the cold side. And then one night, the man on the hotline did not show up, and the chef looked around the kitchen with murder in his eyes and landed on me because I was the only one not hiding, and he said, "Can you cook?" And I said, "I can learn faster than you can yell." And he laughed, which I had not expected, and he let me stand at the flame. I did not leave a flame again for 20 years. There was a man in that second kitchen, a chef named Pruitt, hard as a cast pan and twice as useful, who taught me the only 2 things that ever really mattered. The first was that you taste everything, every time. with a clean spoon, because the day you trust a sauce without tasting it is the day it betrays you in front of 200 people. The second was that the cook who cleans as she goes is the cook who is still standing at midnight. Pruitt never once told me I had talent. He told me I had a back, which in his language was higher praise, because talent quits and a back keeps showing up. I worked for him for 2 years, for almost no money, and I would have paid him if it had gone the other way. He came to my first restaurant when it opened, an old man by then, and he ate the whole tasting without a word. And at the end, he set his fork down square on the plate and said, "You taste everything now?" And I said, "Every time, with a clean spoon." And he nodded once and put his coat on and left, and that nod was worth more to me than the review that came 3 weeks later. I thought about Pruitt sometimes at the family table. He was not my blood, and he saw me completely. My blood was at the table and had never seen me at all. I had spent a long time deciding which of those facts was the one that should be allowed to define me. I moved through 3 cities, I took the worst shifts and the doubles nobody wanted, and I read every book and I staged for free on my days off in kitchens better than the ones that paid me. I made every mistake a cook can make, and I made some of them twice, but I only ever made each of them a third time if I was too tired to stand, and I learned not to be too tired to stand. By 25, I was a sous chef. By 27, I ran a kitchen of my own, somebody else's restaurant, but my kitchen, my line, my standards, my crew, who would have walked into traffic for me because I never once asked them to do a thing I would not do first and do better. At 28, I opened my own place. I called it Saltgrass, after a stretch of marsh where a woman I worked for as a girl, a woman not related to me, used to take me to dig clams and tell me that the difference between food and a meal was attention. Esme Dunmore put up half the money and ran the front while I ran the back, and we nearly went under twice in the first 2 years, and then we did not go under, and then a critic came in on a quiet Tuesday without telling anyone, and 3 weeks later there was a line down the block that did not stop. By 32, there was a second restaurant and an award I keep on a low shelf where I do not have to look at it, because the work is the thing, not the medal they give you for the work. I will tell you something about the night I won that award, because it explains the whole rest of my life better than anything else I could say. I was standing backstage in a hotel ballroom in a city far from home, holding a heavy glass thing they had just handed me, and the first instinct I had, the very first, before pride, before anything, was to call my mother. I had my phone in my hand. I had her number up. I stood there in the noise of the party with my thumb over the call button, 32 years old and a grown woman who employed 40 people, wanting more than I have ever wanted anything to hear my mother say that she was proud of me. And I knew, standing there, exactly how the call would go. I knew she would say, "That's nice, honey," and ask if it came with any money, and tell me I had always landed on my feet. And then she would say she had to go because the program my father liked was about to start. I knew it the way you know the words of a song you hate. So I did not call. I put the phone in my pocket and I went back out to my crew, the cooks who had sweated that menu into being, and we drank cheap beer out of the good glasses, and I let them be my family for the night because they were. That is the night I should have understood it for good. It took me another 7 years and a side salad joke to actually learn it. And 3 years ago, when the most acclaimed restaurant in the city I was born in came up for sale out of receivership, a beautiful wreck of a place called Lindeberg with good bones and a broken heart, I bought it. I bought it quietly, through the company, with my name nowhere a casual person would look. I promoted a cook named Hugo Marchetti, who had come up under me years before and had more talent in his worst service than most chefs have in their best, and I told him to bring it back to life. He did. Within a year, it was the hardest reservation in the city again, the place you took someone when you wanted to say, without saying it, that the evening mattered. Buying it was not sentimental, or I told myself it was not. It was a good restaurant in a good market with a broken balance sheet, and I knew how to fix balance sheets and broken kitchens both. But I would be lying if I pretended there was nothing else in it. I had grown up in that city believing I was no one, and there was a small, quiet, unkillable part of me that wanted to own the most beautiful room in it. Not to show anyone, just to know it was true. The way you sometimes need to know a thing is true privately before you can stop needing anyone else to confirm it. I bought the room where the city celebrated its big nights, the engagements and the anniversaries and the closings of deals, the room my own family would never have dreamed their failure daughter could afford to wash dishes in. And I told no one, and for 3 years just knowing it was enough. I would stand in it, some nights after close, in the dark, and feel something settle in me that had been unsettled since I was 17, at a kitchen table being told the money was needed more for my brother. I did not need them to see it. I needed me to see it. There is a difference, and learning the difference is most of what growing up turned out to be. I never told my family I owned it. I never told them about any of it. I want you to understand that this was not a trap I laid. It was the opposite of a trap. For 20 years, I had let them keep their comfortable story about me because correcting it had only ever cost me. And somewhere in there, I had stopped wanting the correction. I had built a whole life out of their sight, and the life was good, and I did not need them to applaud it. So when my mother called and said, "Your father is retiring and he would want you there," I almost said no. I had a service to run. I had a reason. But she said, "You only get one father, Dara," and against 20 years of evidence, against the burn on my arm, and the notch in my thumb, and every dinner I had ever been seated at the wall for, some small, unkilled thing in me thought, maybe a man at the end of his working life looks back and sees differently. Maybe I will go as a daughter and not as the disappointment, and maybe this once it will be enough just to be there. I did not tell my mother where to make the reservation. Reed did that. Reed picked the most expensive place in the city on purpose to watch me squirm. He picked my restaurant. He just did not know it was mine. I owned the floor they were sitting on, and I had come anyway, as a daughter, hoping to be allowed to be one. That is the whole story, really. Everything after the girl in the apron leaned down to my ear is just the part where the room found out what I already knew, and I found out finally for certain what I had been afraid to know. To understand why I sat there and took the side salad joke without a word, you have to understand that the joke was not new. The joke was the oldest thing in my family. The joke was older than me. When I was 17, there was a college fund. There had been a college fund my whole childhood, a thing my parents mentioned at holidays the way some families mention a lake house, a proof of their foresight and their love. And the spring of my senior year, when it came time to actually open the envelope, my father sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where every verdict in our family was handed down, and he told me that they had decided the money was needed more for Reed. Reed was 3 years younger and had not finished high school yet, but Reed had plans, my father said, real plans, a real future, and they could not split the money 2 ways without ruining it for both of us, and surely I understood. "You'll land on your feet," he told me. "You always do." He meant it as a dismissal. People hear that sentence and think it sounds like faith. It is not faith. Faith would have been giving me the money and trusting me to use it well. What he gave me instead was the chore of surviving without it, and then he called the chore a compliment, so that if I ever complained, I would look like I was insulting his high opinion of me. It was a beautiful machine, that sentence. It cost him nothing, and it cost me everything, and it made him generous in the telling. So I did not go to college. I want to be honest that this still sits in me somewhere, not as regret exactly, because I do not know who I would be with a different 20 years, and I love who the actual 20 years made. But there is a version of me that got the envelope, and once in a great while I think about her, and I hope she would be proud of the one who did not. I should say that the cooking was a verdict too from the very beginning, and not a neutral one. When I was 11, I made dinner for the family on a night my mother was sick, a whole roast chicken with potatoes and a pan sauce I had figured out from a library book, and I set it on the table proud enough to burst, and my father looked at it and asked, not cruelly, just certainly, "Where do you order this from?" And when I told him I had made it, he laughed, delighted, and called my mother in to see. And the way he said it, "Dara's playing chef again," turned the proudest thing I had ever done into a child's game in a single sentence. That was the word that stuck to me for 28 years. Playing. As if the chicken were not real food. As if the hand that made it were not a real hand. I have fed thousands of strangers since then. People who paid good money and left happy. And somewhere in the family's mind, I am still the little girl playing chef in the kitchen, adorable and not to be taken seriously. And the gap between those two facts is so wide that I gave up trying to throw a rope across it long before that dinner at Lindeberg. There were 100 smaller verdicts after that because once a family decides what you are, the machine runs on its own. When I sent money home during my father's heart scare in 2014, a real check, more than I could comfortably spare at the time, my mother told the relatives I had finally chipped in a little, and the story became that I had done the bare minimum, late. When my grandmother died and her recipe box was on the table to be given away, my aunt said, not unkindly, that Dara just plays with food, so the box went to Reed's wife, who did not cook, and I found out later it had ended up in a garage and then in no one knew where. When I told my mother, once, on the phone, that I had opened a restaurant, there was a pause, and then she said, "That's nice, honey. Is it steady?" And I said it was, and she said, "Well, you've always landed on your feet." and I understood that nothing I said was going to be allowed through the door because the door had been bricked over in 1999 and nobody had thought about it since. "We just never saw the cooking as a real thing," my mother said to me once gently, as if she were explaining weather. It was always just a hobby that got out of hand. They built their idea of me when I was a child, and they never once updated the file. That is not a metaphor. It is the most literal description I have. The jar they were having dinner with at Lindeberg was a file 25 years out of date, and they had spent so long defending the file that they could no longer see the woman it was supposed to describe, sitting right there at the wall, declining the menu because she had written half of it. So I sat, and the girl leaned down, and the room began to go quiet, and before I could decide what to do with the quiet, the ground moved, and it did not move because I moved it. Sophia Almeida came across the dining room the way a good maitre d' moves, which is quickly without ever appearing to hurry, and she came with the particular focus of a person correcting an error she finds personally unbearable. Sophia had run my front of house for 2 years. She knew the regulars' anniversaries and the investors' allergies and which table the food writers liked, and to Sophia there was simply no version of the evening, no possible arrangement of the universe, in which the owner of the restaurant was seated at the wall end of a back alcove, being handed a joke about a side salad. She arrived at my shoulder. My father, recovering, lifted his chin and said, in the voice he used for waitstaff, "We're fine here, thank you. We don't need anything." Sophia did not even look at him. She looked at me and she said, "Chef, I am so sorry. We did not have you on the book tonight. We have your table by the window. Hugo's already firing your tasting." And then, because she could not help it, because it offended her in her bones, she glanced at the wall I was sitting against and added quietly, "Forgive me, we never seat you back here." The word she used was chef, not ma'am, not miss. Chef, the way you say a title, the way the whole staff said it, and it landed on the white cloth in the middle of my family like a dropped plate, and you could see each person hear it and not know what to do with it. Reed recovered first, because Reed always recovered first, because Reed had spent his whole life being the one the room reorganized itself around. He laughed and said, "I think you've got her mixed up with somebody. This is my sister." She's not a chef, she's," and he gestured vaguely at me, at all of me, trying to find the word for what I was in the file, and the word he was reaching for was nobody. And even Reed had the sense not to say it out loud to a stranger in an apron. But Bryn, my brother's wife, had gone very still beside him. Bryn was watching the staff. Bryn was watching the girl with the water tray who had stopped near the kitchen door and was standing with 2 of the line cooks, all 3 of them looking at our table. And Bryn was watching the way they were looking, which was not the way you look at a customer. It was the way you look when the boss has walked in unannounced. Bryn was the only adult at the table doing math, and you could see the number she was getting frightened her. My father was not frightened yet. My father was confused, which in him was the thing that came right before anger. He looked at Sophia, and he looked at me, and the smile he had worn all night was still hanging on his face out of habit, like a coat on a man who has come indoors but not yet noticed he is warm. "Mixed her up with who?" my father said. And there it was. The question that ended his evening, asked in his own voice, at his own retirement dinner, at a table he had chosen so that I would be the one explaining myself. For one held minute, I felt the old pull. I want to be honest about that minute, because I think it is the most important minute in the whole night, more than anything that came after. In that minute, I could have made it all go away. I could have said, "Oh, Sophia, you're sweet, there's been a mix-up. Just bring me the salad," and I could have let Sophia, who was no fool, read my face and play along, and I could have folded myself back down into the chair at the wall and let the family keep its story. I could have given them one more night. I had given them 20 years of nights. What was one more? That is how it works, you understand? That is the actual mechanism of it. They do not keep you small by force. They keep you small by making the truth so expensive and so awkward and so disruptive to everyone's comfortable evening that you, being a decent person who does not want to ruin a party, pay the cost yourself, quietly, again, and call it keeping the peace. I had been keeping that peace my whole life. The peace had only ever been mine to keep. None of them had ever once kept it for me. I felt all of that pull at me in the length of a held breath, and then I looked to my left, at my niece. Nell was 12. She was sitting beside me because the seating had put the children at the unimportant end, near the disappointing aunt, and she had been the only person at the table who had not laughed at the side salad joke. She had not laughed, and she had not performed not laughing either. She had just watched, the way children watch when they are trying to learn the rules of the adult world and have noticed that the rules do not add up. She had been looking at me, off and on, all night, with a small line between her eyebrows, as if she were trying to square the aunt the family talked about, with the aunt who was actually sitting next to her, calm and unbothered, declining a menu. And now she was looking at me again, and the line between her eyebrows was deeper, and I understood that whatever I did in the next 10 seconds, Nell was going to file it away. She was going to learn, tonight, one of two lessons. She was going to learn that when the people who are supposed to love you decide you are nothing, you make yourself small to keep their evening pleasant. Or she was going to learn the other thing. I had spent 20 years not correcting them. I could have done one more night of it in my sleep. But I was not going to teach that child the first lesson, not when I had spent my whole life learning my way out of it. So I did not make the joke go away. I stood up, not in anger. I want to be clear about that, because if you take only one thing from this, it should be this. I did not stand up to win. I stood up the way you stand when a friend enters a room, simply because the moment had asked me to be on my feet, and I was done pretending the floor was not mine. "Thank you, Sophia," I said. "The window's fine, and bring the family menus too, please. Whatever they'd like. It's on the house tonight." I said it evenly to the staff, in the voice I use when I am running a room, which is a quiet voice, because a kitchen that is going well is a quiet kitchen, and a dining room that is cared for does not need a raised voice anywhere in it. I said it the way an owner says it. And Sophia, bless her, did not gloat and did not smirk. She just said, "Of course, chef," and she meant it, and she stepped back to clear the path to the window. That was when Hugo came out. You have to understand that an executive chef does not leave the line in the middle of a Friday service. It does not happen. The kitchen is on fire, in the good way, in the only way, and the chef is the still point the fire turns around, and the chef does not walk away from that for anything short of an emergency or an honor. Hugo came out wiping his hands on his apron, in his whites, with the heat of the pass still coming off him, and he crossed the dining room to me, and every table he passed went quiet because the room could feel that something real was happening, even if they did not know what. He stopped in front of me. He is a big man, Hugo, and he had tears standing in his eyes that he would have denied later, and he said loud enough for my family to hear because he was not thinking about my family at all. He was only thinking about me. "Chef Maitland, we didn't know you were in the building." And then he smiled, and he opened his hands to the whole beautiful room he and I had built out of a wreck, and he said, "Welcome to your house." Your house. 2 words. My father heard them. My mother heard them. Reed heard them, and Bryn, and the aunts, and the uncle, and the grown cousins who knew all the family songs. The whole table heard the chef of the most acclaimed restaurant in the city call it my house, and watched him say it like it was the truest and simplest fact in the world, which it was. I have thought a great deal about how to describe the next part, because it is the part you would expect me to enjoy, and I did not enjoy it, and I do not want to pretend I did. My father said, You own this?" He said it the way a man says a thing he is hoping someone will tell him is not true. And I did not make a speech. I had no speech. I had not come with one because I had not come to reveal anything. I had come to eat dinner with my family, so I just told him the plain fact, in the plainest words I had. "I bought it 3 years ago," I said. "I promoted Hugo. We brought it back." 3 years, my mother said faintly. 3 years, I said. "Why?" my father said. And now the confusion was burning off, and you could see the anger underneath it warming up. "Why would you keep that from us? Why would you let us?" He stopped. He did not want to finish the sentence, because finishing the sentence meant saying out loud what they had been doing, which was sitting in their daughter's restaurant making jokes about her being too poor to afford it. "Why would you let us sit here?" And he tried again and stopped again. "Make the joke," I said gently. I was not trying to wound him. I was past wanting to wound him, which is a different and lonelier place than wanting to. "You can say it. You let yourselves make the joke. I didn't keep it from you to set this up. I kept it from you because I wanted to come here as your daughter, not as your reservation, not as the one who's finally useful. I wanted to find out if you could be glad I came when you still thought I had nothing." I looked around the table, at all of them, and I was not angry. I was just very tired and very clear. Now I know. Nobody said anything for a moment, and in that moment I watched the table sort itself, the way a table always does when the truth lands on it, each person reaching for the version of events they could carry. My Aunt Carol, who had laughed loudest at the salad, had put her hand flat on the cloth and was looking at it like she had never seen it before. My Uncle Dell was studying the wine list with enormous concentration, a man waiting for weather to pass. The grown cousins, who had been so fluent in the family songs an hour earlier, had gone silent and slightly gray because the songs only work when everyone agrees to sing them, and the music had just stopped. Bryn was looking at me with something I had not seen aimed at me across a family table in my whole life, which was respect, plain and a little stricken, the respect of a person who has just understood that she has been standing in the wrong place. And Nell beside me had sat up very straight, and there was the smallest light coming up in her face, and I understood that she had needed this almost as much as I had, that the child had been carrying the unfairness of it too, in the way children carry the things the adults around them refuse to name. Hugo had not gone back to the kitchen. He had quietly signaled, and now a runner came out with a single plate and set it down in front of me at the wall, because Hugo would be damned, his word later, before his chef sat in his dining room with nothing in front of her. It was a small thing, a few bites, scallop with brown butter, and a thread of something green, plated the way I had taught him to plate, clean and unfussy, and exactly right. He set it down himself in the end, taking it from the runner's hands, and he said, "Lo, just to me." "On me, chef, always." And my father watched a plate that cost more than the meal he had been bracing to be too good for arrive in front of the daughter he had told to order the side salad, arrive as a gift, from a man in whites who would have walked through the wall for me, and I think that plate told him more than any words I could have said. Nobody said anything more for a while. The side salad joke was still in the air, the way a smell stays in a room after the thing that made it is gone, and not one of them was ever going to be able to repeat it. My father did the thing I had known somewhere that he would do. He reached for the check. There was no check. There was never going to be a check. But the reflex in him was so strong, the need to re-establish himself as the man at the head of the table who pays and therefore presides, that his hand went to the inside of his jacket for his wallet before his mind had caught up. And he said, "Well, let me at least. We'll settle up. I'm not going to have my own daughter." "There's no check, Dad," I said. "You're my guest. You always would have been. If you'd ever once asked me what I did all day, you'd have been eating here for free for 3 years." And that, I think, was the cruelest true thing I said all night. And I did not say it to be cruel. I said it because it was the saddest part. They could have had all of it. The good table, the tasting, the pride of a daughter who had built something beautiful, the warmth of being welcomed into her house. It was all just sitting there. 3 years of it. And the only thing standing between them and it was their absolute commitment to a story about me that they had written before I could drive. The wall I was seated against was not built by Sophia's seating chart. They had built it in 1999, and they had maintained it lovingly ever since. And tonight they got to see, for one moment, what was on the other side of it. And what was on the other side of it was a window table and a chef in his whites and a meal with no price. I did not make them eat it. I told Sophia to seat my family wherever they were comfortable and to take care of them, and I went to the window table, the one the staff always held for me. And I sat down where I should have been sitting all along, and after a while my niece Nell got up from the long table, without asking anyone's permission, and came and sat down across from me at the window, and that is the only part of the night I would keep. The warmth came fast, and that was its own kind of education. Within a week, my brother called me. Not to apologize, you understand. Reed does not apologize, because to apologize you have to first believe you did something, and Reed had spent his whole life as the one the family organized itself to please. And people like that often genuinely cannot find the part of themselves that did wrong. Because it has been excused so many times, it has gone smooth and featureless, like a stone in a river. He called to talk about a partnership. "I've been thinking," Reed said, in the easy voice, the one that had always worked on everyone. "You've got this whole thing going, this empire, and here's me with all this sales experience, and it just seems crazy that we wouldn't, you know? We're family. You could throw a little of this our way. I could come run the front or do the business side. You wouldn't even have to." I let him finish. I have learned to let people finish because they tell you everything if you let them, and Reed told me everything. In a 5-minute phone call, my brother went from never having asked me a single question about my life to having a detailed opinion about how I should restructure it to include him. He had learned my name in one night. He had learned it as an asset. I told him no, and I told him kindly, because there was no reason to be unkind to a man who genuinely could not see what he was doing. I told him the restaurant had a chef and a general manager and a business partner and did not have a vacancy shaped like him, and he got quiet, and then he said the thing that I think he actually believed, which was, "I always looked out for you, though." I let that sit on the line for a second. I thought about the college fund. I thought about every dinner I had been seated at the wall for while Reed sat at the center being looked after. I thought about the grin he had given the server, the small flick of 2 fingers that waved away the girl who knew my name. And I said in your ear, "Reed, I don't think you ever once in your life looked at me long enough to look out for me." It was not cruel. It was just the most accurate sentence I had ever said to my brother, and the silence that followed it told me he had heard it, even if he would never admit it, and we have not really spoken since. An aunt called to ask if I could do something for her granddaughter's engagement party, a real party, 140 people, and then was wounded when I said the restaurant was booked 4 months out and she would need to plan ahead like everyone else. A cousin, who had not spoken to me since we were teenagers, tagged me in a photo from that night. A photo of the dining room with a caption about her incredibly successful aunt, and I looked at it for a while, at how easily the story had flipped, how the same family that had me as the failure now had me as the trophy, and how neither version had ever required them to actually look at me. A failure and a trophy are the same thing in the end. They are both a thing you keep in the house to make yourself feel a certain way. Neither one is a person. The relatives who had not spoken to me in years began, that week, to find their way to me, and each of them came carrying the same small revision of history, polished smooth, in which they had always believed in me, had always known, had said so at the time. My Aunt Carol, who had laughed loudest, called to tell me that she had always thought you had something special, even as a little girl. And I let her say it, because what would be the point of correcting her? Except that I sat there on the phone remembering with perfect clarity that this was the same woman who had handed my grandmother's recipe box to a person who did not cook because Dara just plays with food. They were not lying exactly. That is the strange part. They had genuinely rewritten it. The mind does that for you. When the facts get uncomfortable, it goes back through the file and changes the entries so that you were always on the right side, and they had all done it at once. The whole family. A quiet, coordinated act of revision so that within a month, the official story was that everyone had always been so proud of Dara and the restaurant, and the only person who remembered the wall and the salad and the laughter was me and the 12-year-old who had not laughed. That is the loneliest part of being proven right, by the way, and nobody warns you about it. You expect the reckoning to feel like justice. Instead, you find that you are the only one left holding the actual memory, while everyone around you has gently, sincerely, and completely agreed to remember it the kind way, the way that costs them nothing. You become the keeper of a truth that the people who lived it have decided to forget, and they will look at you with real warmth and real bewilderment if you bring it up, as if you are the one who cannot let go of the past, when all you are doing is declining to pretend it did not happen. And my father. My father did not call for 3 days, and then he left a voicemail, and the voicemail was the most honest thing he gave me in the whole affair, because in it, he was not performing for relatives. And he had had 3 days to find the version of the story he could live with. And the version he could live with was that I had done this to him, that I had, on the night of his retirement, the night that was supposed to be about him, deliberately humiliated him in front of the whole family by springing my success on him like a trap. "I just don't understand," his voice said, tinny, into my kitchen at midnight while I was breaking down the last of the Mies. "Why you'd want to make me look like that, on my night, in front of everybody. You had to know what it would do. You always were." And there was a long pause, and I waited, because I genuinely wanted to know how the sentence ended. And the sentence ended. "You always were a hard one to love." I stood in my kitchen and listened to it twice. I was not destroyed by it. I had expected something like it. But I want to tell you the truth, which is that hearing your father say you were a hard one to love, even when you are 39 and successful and standing in a kitchen you own, reaches back through all the years and finds the 17-year-old at the table being told the college money was needed more for her brother. And it hurts her, and through her, it hurts you. That is how those wounds work. The success does not numb them. It just gives you a nicer room to feel them in. I did not call him back that night. I finished the Mies, I wiped down the pass, I turned off the lights one bank at a time, the way I like to, the room going dark in stages, and I stood for a minute in the dark dining room with just the streetlight coming through the front windows, in the silence after a good service, which is the most peaceful silence I know. I had cooked all night the way I cook when something is sitting on my chest, which is well, because the line does not care what is wrong with you, the line only cares whether the food is right, and there is a mercy in that. For 4 hours, I had not been a daughter or a disappointment or an owner. I had been a pair of hands and a clock and a row of tickets, and the work had held me the way it always holds me, the way it held me at 18 in the flooded dish pit, and at 28 on the verge of losing everything, and a 32 backstage with the heavy glass thing in my hand. The work has never once decided I was a hard one to love. The work just asks me to show up and pay attention. And when I do, it gives me back exactly what I put in, no more and no less. And after a lifetime of a family that took everything and called it a gift, you cannot imagine what a relief it is to deal with something that keeps honest books. And there in the dark, with no one watching, I let myself grieve. And I want to tell you what I was grieving because it surprised me. I was not grieving the family I lost that night at the table. I had not lost them that night. I had lost them slowly, across decades, in 1,000 small declined invitations to see me, and I had finished mourning the actual people a long time ago. What I grieved, standing in the dark of my own restaurant, was the family I had kept inventing. The version in my head where my father, at the end of his working life, looked back and softened. The version where my mother, just once, asked a real question and waited for the real answer. I had carried those invented people around for 39 years, and I had fed them with hope every time the phone rang, and the dinner had finally killed them. And you can grieve an imaginary person. It turns out you can grieve them harder than a real one, because the real one at least disappointed you in person. And the imaginary one was always exactly as kind as you needed, right up until the moment you finally admitted they were never going to exist. I thought about my grandmother's recipe box, the one that just plays with food, lost into a garage and then into nowhere. I had been angry about that box for years, and standing in the dark, I realized that I did not actually need the box. I had been at that woman's elbow for 100 Sunday afternoons. The recipes were not in the box, they were in the hand with the burn scar and the notched thumb. I went to the cold kitchen, and I found a pen and the back of a prep list, and I wrote out her braised short rib from memory, and then her apple cake, the one with the brown butter, and when I read them back, they were right. They were exactly right. And I started to cry a little. Finally, not for my father, but for her, the one woman in my childhood who had looked at me cooking and seen a real thing and not a hobby that got out of hand. Being proven right is cold. I learned that in the dark that night. The look on my father's face when Hugo said your house, the silence where the joke used to be, none of it warmed me at all. It was just cold and clear like the walk-in. Being right is cold. If I wanted the warm part, I was going to have to make it myself, with my own scarred hands, the way I had made everything else. So that is what I did. Here is how the doors closed and the one that stayed open. My father came to the restaurant once, about 3 weeks after. He came at 4 in the afternoon, between services, which told me my mother had told him when we would be quiet, which told me he had asked, which was almost something. He sat at the bar and I poured him a coffee, and we were, for a moment, just a father and a daughter in an empty, beautiful room. And I let myself hope one more time, the very last time, because I am evidently a person who will hope past all reason, and that is not a flaw I am ashamed of anymore. He did not apologize. He had come to ask me to smooth it over. That was the phrase he used. He wanted me to call the aunts, to come to the next family gathering and be warm so that everyone could see there were no hard feelings, to put it behind us for your mother's sake. Because the relatives were talking, and it was making things uncomfortable for him at the family level. He had come to ask the daughter he had called hard to love to do the emotional labor of repairing his reputation with the very people he had performed for at my expense. I said no. I said it gently, and I said it once, and I did not explain it more than once because I have learned that explaining a boundary more than once is just negotiating it. I told him I loved him, which was true and is still true, because you can love someone and also decline to keep paying rent on their good opinion of themselves. I told him that the door was not slammed, but that I was not going to be the one to do the smoothing. Not anymore, because I had been the one doing the smoothing my whole life, and it had cost me everything and bought me nothing. He left his coffee mostly full. He has not called since, and I have made my peace with the real possibility that he never will, and that the voicemail about being hard to love may turn out to be the last full sentence my father ever speaks to me. I hope it is not, but I am not going to set myself on fire to keep him warm enough to maybe change his mind. My mother sent nothing. No call, no card. My mother's whole power in the family was the gentle laugh, the soft agreement, the standing at my father's side while looking like she was reaching toward me, and she could not do that across this, so she did the thing she has always done when the script ran out, which was nothing. I have left that door at an inch. If she ever walks through it with a real question and waits for the real answer, I will be here. I am not holding my breath, and I am not holding it shut either. Reed sent one more text when it became clear there was no partnership coming. It was not warm. It was shaped like an invoice. It listed, in his way, all the things the family had supposedly done for me over the years, a strange and inventive accounting in which the college fund they took became, "We always supported your independence." And it ended by saying that real family shares. I did not answer it. There was nothing in it to answer. You cannot reply to a bill for a debt you do not owe. And Nell. About a month after the dinner, a card came to the restaurant, addressed in careful 12-year-old handwriting, and inside, in the same careful hand, my niece had written, "You were my favorite even before the window. I'm glad it was your house." That was all. I read it standing at the pass, and then I put it in my breast pocket behind the thermometer where I keep the things that matter, and it is still there. The next time I went to the city, I did not go for the family. I went for Nell. I told my brother, through Bryn, who turned out to be a more decent person than the family she married into, that Nell was welcome at the restaurant any time, and the following month Bryn drove her down and dropped her off, just the two of them, no Reed, and I put Nell at the window table, the good table, the one the staff hold for the owner, and I cooked for her myself. I made her the short rib from my grandmother's recipe and the brown butter apple cake, and I told her about the woman who taught me, and I told her that the difference between food and a meal is attention, and Nell, who is a serious child, wrote it down. I taught her to hold a knife, the real way, knuckles forward, the blade an extension of the hand and not a weapon held against the food. She was careful and unafraid, which is the exact right combination and rarer than you would think. She asked me good questions, the kind nobody in my family had ever asked me. Questions like, how did you know it was done, and what do you do when you ruin it? And were you ever scared you wouldn't make it? And I answered all of them honestly, including the last one, because I was not going to lie to the one person in that family who had looked at me straight. I told her I was scared most of the time, for about 10 years, and that being scared and doing it anyway is most of what courage actually is, that courage is not the absence of the fear, but the decision to keep your hands moving through it. She wrote that down too. She has a little notebook now, like the one I kept at her age, and I have decided that if the only thing I ever pass down from that whole family is a knife grip and a notebook and the knowledge that you can be scared and still be good, then the line did not die with my grandmother after all. It skipped a generation and found the kid at the unimportant end of the table, which is, I have come to think, exactly where these things tend to survive. I did not tell her she was the only one who never laughed. I think she knows. Children always know. They know long before they have the words for it, which is precisely why it matters so much what they watch the adults around them do. When she left that day, Bryn came in to collect her, and Bryn stood in the doorway of my kitchen for a moment. This woman who had married into all of it and somehow kept her own eyes, and she said, "Thank you for being good to her. She talks about you all the time." And then she said, quieter, "I'm sorry about that night. I didn't say anything. I should have said something." And I told her the truth, which is that almost nobody says anything in that moment, that the whole machine runs on almost nobody ever saying anything, and that the fact she was saying it now, weeks late, in a doorway, already made her braver than the rest of them combined. I meant it. Bryn is the one bond from that family that earned its keep, and she earned it by being the only adult who came back later and named the thing out loud. Esme came to the city for that visit, to meet Nell, and afterward, when Nell had gone home and it was just the two of us closing the bar, Esme, who has watched me carry my family around for 15 years like a stone in a coat pocket, looked at me and said, the thing I needed someone to say out loud. "You don't owe them a table," she said. "You never did." She is right. I want to say it to you too, because I think some of you are carrying the same stone. I cook for a living, so let me put it the way I know how. There are people who will only ever come to your table once they hear there is something on it worth eating. They ignored the kitchen when the lights were off, and the cooking was just a hobby that got out of hand. They sent the inheritance to your brother and told you it was a compliment. They sat you against the wall and handed you a joke about a side salad, and they did it warmly, with an audience, on a night they chose. And the moment they find out the floor is yours, the moment the chef walks out in his whites and calls it your house, they will pull their chairs around to face you, and they will smile, and they will call it love, and it will be the same thing it always was, which is hunger. If they decided who you were a long time ago and never once checked again, you are not required to keep handing them proof. You are not required to keep auditioning for people who will only clap when you become useful to them. The respect you have to earn over and over, The respect that disappears the second you stop being impressive was never respect. It was rent, and you are allowed, at any age with scarred hands, in the dark of a room you built, to stop paying it. I set one place at the window now when I visit. For my niece, who came across the room without being asked. For the chef who walked off his line to say welcome home. For the woman who taught me at her elbow on a marsh full of saltgrass that attention is the whole secret. For the people who never needed me to prove a thing, who were glad I came when they still thought I had nothing. Those are my guests. Those have always been my guests. So order what you want. Anything on the menu. The expensive thing, if you like. The bill was never yours to be afraid of, and it was certainly never theirs to hold over you. Take care of yourself, and take care of the ones who pulled their chair to your table back when the table was empty. I will see you next time.